The silence in the northern kingdom was not empty, it was heavy. It pressed against the stone walls of the temple courtyard where Hosea stood, a weight that felt less like peace and more like a held breath before a scream. The air in Samaria tasted of dust and stale incense, the remnants of sacrifices offered with hands that were quick to shed blood and slow to show mercy. Hosea was a young man, known among the few faithful families for a devotion that bordered on severity. He did not laugh easily. His eyes were constantly scanning the horizon, not for rain, but for judgment. He spent his days watching the priests stumble through rituals, their eyes glazed with wine, their prayers hollow echoes that never seemed to rise above the ceiling. He felt a burning in his chest that he could not extinguish, a grief that was too large for one human heart to contain. On this particular evening, the shadows of the pillars stretched long across the stone floor. Hosea was alone. He had come to pray, to ask the Almighty why the heavens remained brass, why the law was paralyzed, why the people danced around golden calves while the true altar lay cold. He expected silence. He expected the usual struggle of faith. He did not expect the voice. It did not come as a thunderclap shaking the foundations of the earth, nor did it come in a whirlwind that tore the cedars apart. It arrived as a thought that was alien to his own mind, a command so startling, so repugnant to his upbringing, that he physically recoiled, stumbling back against a cold stone pillar. "Go," the instruction whispered in the marrow of his bones. "Take for yourself a wife of whoredom, and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord." Hosea gasped, his hands gripping the rough fabric of his tunic. He looked around wildly, half expecting to see a mocker hiding in the shadows, a drunkard playing a cruel trick on the prophet. But the courtyard was empty. The only sound was the distant, raucous laughter from the city market, where morality was sold for silver. "Lord," Hosea whispered, his voice trembling, "surely I have misheard." The command remained, immovable as a mountain. It was not a suggestion, it was an assignment. Hosea fell to his knees. His mind raced through the Levitical laws, the codes of purity he had strictly observed since he was a boy. He had kept himself clean. He had avoided the very appearance of evil. He was a vessel set apart. How could the Holy One ask him to bind his life, his body, and his reputation to a woman of the streets, a woman whose very existence was an insult to the covenant? "I am a prophet," Hosea argued into the twilight, sweat beading on his forehead. "My life is a testimony. If I do this, they will mock me. They will say I am no different from the priests who visit the temple prostitutes. My words will lose all power. I will be a joke in the gates of the city." The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with a sorrow so profound it nearly crushed him. In that moment, the barrier between the heart of Hosea and the heart of God thinned. Hosea felt a wave of agony wash over him, not his own agony, but a divine grief. He felt the sting of betrayal, the nausea of rejection, the burning ache of a husband watching his bride undress for a stranger. He realized then that this was not about him. It was not about his reputation or his comfort. It was a play, a living theater of the macabre, and he was to play the part of the fool, the faithful fool who loves a woman who cannot love him back. He was to become a mirror for Israel. "You want them to see," Hosea realized, his voice breaking. "You want them to see what they have done to you." The logic was brutal. Words had failed. The people had stopped listening to sermons years ago. They needed a picture. They needed to see a righteous man bind himself to a harlot so they could understand the scandal of a holy God binding himself to Israel. Hosea stood up slowly. His knees ached. The burning in his chest had changed from anger to a dull, throbbing resolve. He wiped the sweat from his brow. To obey this command was social suicide. It was the end of his dignity. It guaranteed a life of heartbreak. He knew, with the terrible foresight of a prophet, that this woman would break him. She would not change just because he married her, the command said, children of whoredom, implying a future that continued in shame. But the voice had spoken. The burden was on his shoulders. Hosea straightened his robe. He did not look back at the sanctuary. He turned his face toward the city gates, toward the districts where decent men did not go after dark, toward the marketplace of flesh where his destiny was waiting. He walked into the gathering night, a man marching toward his own execution, armed only with a love he did not yet feel and a command he could not escape. Your support gives a voice to the broken and strength to those who feel forgotten. Please like and subscribe to help us uncover the truths that many choose to ignore. And stay with us because you won't believe how far this love is willing to descend to redeem a heart that betrayed it. The lower market of the city was a sensory assault. Even before Hosea saw it, he could smell it, the scent of roasted meat masking the stench of refuse, the perfume of foreign oils trying to cover the odor of sweat and desperation. It was a place where shadows lengthened early and stayed late. Hosea walked through the crowd, pulling his mantle tight around his face. He felt the eyes of the city upon him. He was out of place here. His linen was too clean, his stride too purposeful. Men with hollow eyes and women with painted faces watched him pass, their whispers sounding like the hiss of serpents. He ignored them, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was looking for a name the Spirit had impressed upon him. Gomer, its daughter of Diblaim. He found her near the vendors selling cheap wine and dried figs. She was not hard to find. Her laughter was the loudest thing in the street, a sharp, brittle sound that shattered as soon as it hit the air. Hosea stopped in the shadow of a merchant's stall and watched her. Gomer was beautiful, in the way a storm is beautiful, wild, dangerous, and carrying the promise of ruin. Her dark hair was uncovered, a scandalous breach of custom, cascading over shoulders that were bare to the evening chill. Her eyes were lined with kohl, making them look large and fierce, but beneath the defiance, Hosea saw a profound exhaustion. She was leaning against a wooden post, toying with a clay cup, surrounded by 3 men who were bidding for her attention with coarse jokes. She looked at them not with affection, but with the calculating gaze of a merchant assessing livestock. Hosea stepped out of the shadows. The noise of the market seemed to dull in his ears, leaving only the sound of his own footsteps on the packed earth. Gomer, he said. The name hung in the air. It was not shouted, yet it carried an authority that cut through the banter of the men surrounding her. She turned, her eyes narrowed as she scanned him, taking in his simple but quality robes, his groomed beard, the lack of wine on his breath. She smirked, a practiced expression meant to disarm and demean. The temple is up the hill, holy man, Gomer said, her voice raspy. You have taken a wrong turn. Or perhaps, she leaned forward, a mock whisper on her lips, the prayers were too dry tonight, and you are looking for something wetter? The men around her erupted in laughter. Hosea did not flinch. He did not look at the men. He looked only at her. He saw the layers of defense she had built, stone by stone, year by year. He saw a woman who believed she was worth exactly what was in the purse of the man standing in front of her. I am not here for a night, Hosea said. Gomer tilted her head, feigning confusion. Then you are wasting my time. Move along. Unless you want to preach, I charge double for listening to sermons. I am here to offer a covenant, Hosea stated. The laughter around them died down, replaced by a confused silence. One of the men, a burly tanner with stained hands, stepped closer to Hosea, looming over him. What did you say? Hosea held Gomer's gaze. I am Hosea, son of Beeri. I am asking for your hand. I am here to make you my wife. For the first time, the mask slipped. Gomer's mouth parted slightly, her eyes widening in genuine shock. She looked at his hands, expecting to see a weapon or a trick. She looked at his face, searching for the cruelty of a jest. She found neither. She found only a terrifying intensity. She let out a short, sharp breath that was almost a laugh. You are mad. I am serious, Hosea replied. Do you know who I am? Gomer demanded, her voice rising, drawing the attention of passers-by. Do you know what I am? I am not a girl from your village who blushes at the sight of a man's ankle. I belong to this street. I belong to anyone who has silver. You belong to no one, Hosea said, his voice dropping an octave, soft but firm. You are a daughter of Israel, and I am taking you out of this street. And if I refuse? She challenged, crossing her arms, though her hands were trembling slightly. You will not refuse, Hosea said, not with arrogance, but with a strange certainty. Because you are tired, Gomer. You are tired of the dawn bringing nothing but shame. You are tired of selling pieces of your soul to men who do not know your name. Gomer stared at him. The truth of his words struck her like a physical blow. She wanted to scream at him, to drive him away, to protect the chaotic freedom she thought she possessed. But the hunger in her gut was not just for bread. It was for rest. She looked at the men around her, the tanner, the merchant, the soldier. They looked at her body. This stranger looked at her face. The crowd had gathered now. They were muttering, pointing. "Is that not the prophet?" someone whispered. "Is he drunk? He is proposing to the daughter of Diblaim." The public shame began to settle on Hosea's shoulders, heavy and suffocating. He could feel the judgment radiating from the crowd. He was becoming a byword in real time. Gomer saw the crowd too. She saw the risk he was taking. A twisted curiosity sparked within her. Why would he do this? What kind of game was this? "You are a fool," she said, her voice lower now, devoid of its earlier mockery. "You will regret this before the moon sets." "That is my burden to bear," Hosea answered. He extended a hand. It was steady. "Come with me." Gomer looked at the hand. It was clean. If she took it, she would be leaving the only life she knew how to survive. If she took it, she would be walking into a world of judgment, of holy laws she had long ago broken. But the alternative was to stay here, under the leering gaze of the tanner. Slowly, defying her own instincts, Gomer reached out. Her fingers were rough, stained with cheap dye. As her skin touched his, a shiver went through the crowd. The scandal was consummated. "I will go," she whispered, half to herself. "But do not think you can tame me, Hosea. I am not a pet to be kept in your holy house." "I do not seek a pet," Hosea said, closing his fingers around hers. "I seek a wife." He turned, pulling her gently away from the stall, away from the stunned men, and led her through the parting crowd. He did not look down, but he could feel the heat of her hand in his. He was walking out of the darkness with a piece of it in his grasp, bringing the shadow into his home. The first act of the tragedy had begun. The ceremony was brief, stripped of the joy that usually accompanied a wedding in Israel. There were no processions of singing maidens, no feasting that lasted for 7 days, and no wine flowing freely in the streets. It took place at the gates of the city, under the heavy, judgmental gaze of the elders who sat on the stone benches. They witnessed the vows not with smiles, but with the grim faces of men watching a disaster unfold. Hosea stood tall, his hands clasped firmly together to hide any tremor. Beside him stood Gomer. She had scrubbed the paint from her eyes and worn the modest linen tunic Hosea had provided, yet she wore the clothes like a costume. Her posture was defiant, her chin tilted upward as if daring anyone to speak the insults that hung on their lips. When the elder recited the ancient words of the covenant, his voice lacked the usual warmth. He spoke quickly, eager to finish the uncomfortable duty of binding a prophet to a woman of ill repute. Hosea spoke his vows clearly, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the gathering crowd. He promised shelter, he promised food, he promised the duty of a husband. Gomer's voice was lower, a mere mutter. She spoke the words, but her eyes were roving over the crowd, locking gazes with men she knew, men who looked away in embarrassment or smirked in amusement. To her, this was a transaction. She had made many agreements with men before. This one simply had more witnesses and no gold exchanging hands up front. When the final blessing was muttered, a blessing that sounded more like a sigh of relief, Hosea took Gomer by the arm. The touch was gentle, possessive yet protective. He led her away from the gate, up the winding path toward his home in the quieter, respectable quarter of the city. The walk was a gauntlet. Neighbors who had known Hosea since he was a boy turned their backs as the couple approached. Mothers pulled their children inside, slamming wooden doors with deliberate force. The silence was louder than the insults of the marketplace. Hosea kept his eyes forward, his jaw set. He was walking into isolation. By bringing her in, he was casting himself out. They arrived at his home, a sturdy structure of stone and timber. Hosea opened the door and ushered her in. The interior was stark, clean, and terrifyingly quiet. To Gomer, accustomed to the noise of the tavern and the chaos of the street, the silence felt like a trap. She stood in the center of the main room, her arms wrapped around herself. "This is your home," Hosea said, closing the door and shutting out the world. "You are safe here." Gomer laughed, a dry, humorless sound. She spun around to face him. "Safe? Did you see their eyes, Hosea? They wanted to stone us. You have not brought me to safety. You have brought me to a prison where the wardens are your righteous neighbors." "They will learn," Hosea said calmly, moving to light an oil lamp as the evening deepened. "They judge by the law of Moses, but they have forgotten the heart of it. We will show them. We. Gomer stepped closer, her scent a mix of cheap perfume and the fresh soap she had used filling the small space. There is no we, prophet. There is you, the holy fool, and me, the mistake you are making. Why are you doing this? Do you think you can save me? Do you think if you feed me and clothe me, I will turn into a pious matron who bakes bread and prays 3 times a day? Hosea turned to look at her. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sorrow in his eyes. I do not expect you to change tonight. I expect you to be my wife. And what does a wife do? Gomer asked, her voice taking on a suggestive edge, a defense mechanism she had used 1,000 times. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch the fabric of his robe. I know how to please a man, Hosea. Is that what you want? Is that why you bought me with marriage instead of silver? It is cheaper this way, is it not? Hosea caught her hand. He did not squeeze it in anger, nor did he pull her close in passion. He simply held it, stopping her movement. I am not those men, he said, his voice firm. I did not marry you to take from you. I married you to give to you. You are not a commodity here. You are a person. You bear the image of the Almighty. Gomer froze. She tried to pull her hand away, but he held fast. Confusion flickered across her face. She knew lust. She knew violence. She knew commerce. She did not know this. It frightened her more than a blow would have. Let me go, she hissed. You are free to walk in this house, Hosea said, releasing her hand slowly. There is food in the jar. There is water in the basin. Rest, Gomer. You have been running for a long time. He turned and walked into the small side room he used for prayer and study, leaving her standing alone in the center of the room. Gomer stared at his retreating back. She felt a sudden, irrational surge of anger. He was refusing to play the game by the rules she understood. If he did not want her body immediately, what did he want? If he did not want to use her, what use was she? She paced the room like a caged animal. The orderliness of the house mocked her. The clean mats, the swept floor, the scrolls neatly arranged on the shelf. It was a world she did not belong in. She went to the window and looked out. The city was dark, but she knew that down in the valley, the fires were burning. She knew the music was starting. She felt the pull of the night in her blood. But she stayed, not because of the vow, but because for the first time in her life, she was curious. She wanted to see how long this righteous man could keep up the act before he broke, just like everyone else. Months passed, and the scandal did not fade. It merely settled into the stones of the city like a permanent stain. Gomer found the domestic life to be a slow, suffocating death. The silence of the house was broken only by the scratching of Hosea's quill or his low murmurings in prayer. She performed the duties of a wife mechanically. She baked the bread, she drew the water, she swept the floor, but her eyes were always distant. When she discovered she was with child, the dynamic in the house shifted. Hosea received the news with a mixture of profound joy and terrifying solemnity. He treated Gomer with even greater care, ensuring she had the best portions of the meal, insisting she rest when the heat of the day was at its peak. For a brief season, Gomer softened. The life growing inside her was a distraction from her boredom. She allowed herself to imagine a future where this child might bridge the gap between her and the community, or at least between her and her husband. But Hosea was a man under orders. He knew this child was not just a son, he was a sign. The day of the birth was long and arduous. The midwives came only because Hosea paid them double. They touched Gomer with disdain, doing their work efficiently, but without the cooing comfort they offered other women. Hosea waited outside the room, pacing the small courtyard, his heart wrestling with the voice that had spoken to him again. Finally, the cry of an infant pierced the air. One of the midwives came out, wiping her hands on a cloth. "It is a son," she said flatly, strong, loud. Hosea entered the room. The air was thick with the smell of blood and sweat. Gomer lay on the mat, pale and exhausted, her dark hair plastered to her forehead. Beside her, wrapped in swaddling cloths, lay the boy. Hosea knelt beside them. He reached out and touched the infant's cheek with a trembling finger. The love he felt was instant and overwhelming. This was his flesh. This was a new beginning. Gomer looked at him, a faint, tired smile on her lips. "He has your brow," she whispered. "What shall we call him? My father was named Diblaim, but that is a harsh name. Perhaps Nathan or Samuel." Hosea's hand froze on the child's face. The joy in his chest collided with the stone of his calling. He looked at his wife, seeing the rare flicker of hope in her eyes, and he knew he was about to extinguish it. "He cannot be named Samuel," Hosea said, his voice choking. "Why not?" Gomer asked, sensing the shift in his mood. "It is a good name. God has heard." "The Lord has spoken," Hosea said, tears filling his eyes. "He has given me the name." Gomer pulled the baby slightly closer to her chest, defensive. "What is it?" "Call his name Jezreel," Hosea whispered. The room went deadly silent. The midwives stopped cleaning the basins. Gomer stared at him, her face draining of what little color it had left. "Jezreel," she repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. "You want to name our son after the valley of slaughter? You want to name him after the place where kings were butchered and dogs ate the flesh of queens?" "It is not what I want," Hosea pleaded. "It is what must be. For in just a little while, the Lord will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and he will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel." Gomer sat up, wincing in pain, her eyes flashing with fury. "This is a baby. This is a singular, innocent life. And you want to make him a curse? Every time I call him for dinner, I have to shout a massacre into the street. Every time he plays with other children, he will carry the weight of a dead kingdom." "He is a warning, Gomer," Hosea said, though his own heart was breaking. "He is a living testimony that the day of reckoning is coming. God is sowing judgment in the land." "God, God, God," Gomer screamed, clutching the infant who began to wail at the noise. "Is that all there is in your head? Does your God not care that a mother wants to love her son without thinking of blood? You are cruel, Hosea. You and your God are cruel." "It is the cruelty of the truth to save us from the cruelty of the lie," Hosea countered, his voice strengthening with prophetic authority, even as tears ran down his beard. "Israel sleeps on a bed of worms and calls it silk. Jezreel will wake them up." Gomer looked down at the crying infant. She smoothed the hair on his small red head. Her expression hardened, the softness of the last few months evaporating like morning mist. She looked up at Hosea, and her eyes were cold. "Fine," she said, her voice icy. "Name him Jezreel. Make him your sermon, but do not expect me to say amen." The naming ceremony days later was a public horror. When Hosea announced the name before the small gathering, a gasp went through the crowd. Men stepped back as if the child were contagious. To name a son Jezreel was treason against the crown and blasphemy against the peace they pretended to enjoy. It was a political threat wrapped in a blanket. Hosea held his son high, proclaiming the judgment of the Almighty, but as he looked at the crowd, he saw only fear and hatred. And when he looked at his wife, standing in the doorway, he saw something worse. He saw distance. She was looking at the horizon again, toward the hills where the wild celebrations were held. She was looking away from him, and away from the son who was now a burden of prophecy. The baby slept in his father's arms, unaware that his very name was the first crack in the foundation of the house, a crack that would soon widen into a chasm that would swallow them all. The valley of Jezreel was known for blood, and now that blood seemed to seep into the floorboards of Hosea's home. The tragedy was no longer just outside the door. It was in the cradle. The silence in the house had changed texture. In the beginning, it had been the awkward silence of two strangers learning to share a space. Now, nearly 2 years after the birth of Jezreel, the silence was a living thing, sharp and suffocating, filled with things unsaid. Gomer sat by the loom, her hands moving the shuttle back and forth with a rhythm that bordered on violence. The thread was coarse, meant for simple tunics, not the fine linen she had once worn when men sought her favor. She hated the loom. She hated the smell of the yeast rising in the corner. She hated the way the sunlight crawled so slowly across the floor, marking the passing of another day indistinguishable from the last. Jezreel was playing near her feet, stacking small wooden blocks. He was a quiet child, possessing his father's intense, brooding eyes. Sometimes, when Gomer looked at him, she felt a surge of fierce protection. Other times, she felt a cold detachment, as if he belonged to the prophecy more than he belonged to her. His name was a burden that seemed to age him before his time. "I am going to the market," Gomer announced suddenly, stopping the loom. Hosea was sitting near the window, studying a scroll of the law. He did not look up immediately. The tension in his shoulders tightened. It was the third time this week she had gone to the market, yet the pantry was full. "We have enough flour, Gomer," Hosea said, his voice even, stripped of accusation but heavy with knowing. "I need thread," she lied. The lie tasted like copper in her mouth, familiar and thrilling, and the boy needs fresh air. The house smells of stale oil. Hosea finally looked at her. His eyes were not angry. They were tired. They held the look of a man who was watching a slow-motion catastrophe and knew he was powerless to stop the first stone from falling. He stood up and walked toward her. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, reverent, and it made Gomer's skin crawl. She did not want reverence. She wanted fire. She wanted the chaotic, dangerous spark she used to feel when a stranger looked at her with hunger rather than holiness. "Come back before the sun touches the hills," Hosea said. "The streets are not safe." "I know the streets better than you, prophet," she retorted, pulling away from his touch. She scooped up Jezreel, who whined at the interruption of his game, and marched out the door. The air outside was crisp, but Gomer did not go to the merchants selling thread. She wove through the crowded alleys, her heart beating faster with every step that took her further from the sanctuary of Hosea's home. She left Jezreel with a neighbor, an old woman who asked no questions as long as a copper coin was pressed into her palm. Free of the child, Gomer walked with a different gait. Her hips swayed. She adjusted her tunic to reveal the line of her neck. She was heading toward the district of the dyers and the vintners, where the air smelled of crushed grapes and money. She found him where she knew he would be. He was a merchant of purple cloth, a man she had known before Hosea. He was not kind, and he was not righteous, but he laughed loudly and wore gold rings on 3 fingers. When he saw her, his eyes lit up not with the heavy, demanding love of a husband, but with the simple, transactional lust she understood. "The prophet's wife returns," the merchant sneered, though he poured her a cup of wine immediately. "Has the holy life lost its flavor so soon?" "Do not talk of him," Gomer said, taking the cup. She drank deeply, the wine burning her throat, washing away the taste of unleavened bread and duty. "Talk to me of the world. Talk to me of things that are not laws and judgments." For an hour, she sat in the shadows of his stall. She let him touch her hand. She let him whisper praises that she knew were false, but they felt like water to a parched plant. He gave her a small silver earring, a trinket of no real value, but to Gomer it was a token of her old power. It was proof that she was still desired, not just redeemed. When she returned home, the sun was already bleeding into the horizon. She tried to walk quietly, but the door creaked. Hosea was waiting. He had not lit the lamp. He sat in the darkness, a silhouette against the gray light of the window. He stood up as she entered. He did not yell. He simply walked close to her and inhaled. "You smell of foreign wine," he said, "and myrrh that is not yours." Gomer stiffened. "I met a friend. We shared a cup. Is that a sin now, too? Is joy forbidden in the commandments?" "It is not joy you were seeking, Gomer. It is validation," Hosea said, his voice trembling slightly. "Why do you run to cisterns that hold no water when you have a well in your own home?" "Because your well is too deep," Gomer shouted, the wine loosening her tongue. "You love me, Hosea, but you love me like a project. You look at me, and you see a lesson for Israel. You do not see me. You see a sinner you are saving. Those men, they see a woman. They see a body," Hosea countered, stepping into the light. "They take from you and leave you empty. I have given you a covenant. I have given you my name. I protect you." "I never asked to be protected," she screamed, throwing the small bag of thread she had bought as a prop onto the floor. "I asked to be alive. And in this house, under the weight of your God and your prophecies, I am suffocating." She brushed past him, retreating into the sleeping chamber. Hosea stood alone in the main room. He looked at the scattered thread on the floor. He saw the glint of the silver earring she had hastily tried to hide in her sash. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that the cracks in the foundation were no longer hairline fractures. The wall was coming down, and the God who had sent him into this storm remained silent, watching the heartbreak unfold exactly as he had ordained. The seasons turned, and the winter rains brought a chill that seeped into the bones of the city. But the chill inside Hosea's house was colder than anything the winds could bring. Gomer was with child again. The pregnancy was different this time. With Jezreel, there had been a shared, albeit tense, anticipation. Now, there was only a heavy, unspoken knowledge. Hosea knew the dates. He knew the nights he had spent alone in prayer while Gomer was visiting neighbors. He knew, as surely as he knew the sun rose in the east, that the life growing inside her was not of his seed. The town knew it too. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were open conversations in the city gates. The prophet raises another man's brood, they said. Where is his jealousy? Where is the stone of judgment? Hosea walked through the ridicule with his head high, but his heart was a landscape of ruin. He continued to feed Gomer. He continued to ensure she had warm blankets. He did not strike her. He did not divorce her. He acted out the devastating patience of the Almighty, showing kindness to a wife who was actively betraying him. When the time came for the child to be born, the atmosphere was grim. There was no joy, only the clinical necessity of birth. Gomer labored in silence, her face set in a mask of endurance. She did not call out for Hosea. She did not want his hand to hold. She wanted to be done with the pain so she could retreat back into her internal exile. It was a girl. The baby was small, her cries thin and reedy, like a bird caught in a storm. The midwife cleaned the child and hesitated before handing her to Hosea. Even she, a stranger, could feel the heaviness in the room. This child was evidence. She was a living artifact of adultery. Hosea took the girl in his arms. He looked down at her face. She did not look like him. She had the dark, restless eyes of her mother, and perhaps the chin of the merchant, or the soldier, or whoever had fathered her in the shadows. Hosea waited for the voice. Part of him hoped for mercy. Part of him prayed that God would allow him to give her a name that promised redemption, a name like grace or return, something to soften the blow of her conception. But the voice, when it came, was terrifying in its finality. Call her name Lo-Ruhamah, the Lord said. Hosea felt his knees weaken. Lo-Ruhamah. It was a negation, a cancellation. It meant not loved or no mercy. For I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, the voice continued, that I should forgive them at all. Hosea looked at the innocent infant. To name a child no mercy was to curse her existence from the first breath. It was to declare that the protection of the Father was withdrawn. It was a message to the nation that the cycle of second chances was ending. They had assumed God's love was a right, a permanent state that allowed them to sin without consequence. Now, through this child, God was saying, I am done. Gomer watched from the birthing mat. She saw the color drain from Hosea's face. What does he say? She asked, her voice raspy. What does your God want to call this one? Judgment? Fire? He calls her Lo-Ruhamah, Hosea whispered, his voice cracking. Gomer flinched. Even in her hardness, the name struck a nerve. No mercy? She repeated softly. He hates her? He does not hate the child, Hosea said, tears finally spilling over his cheeks, dropping onto the swaddling clothes of the girl who was not his. He is withdrawing his hand from the people. He is showing us what life looks like without his pity. Hosea held the girl closer. A fierce, paradoxical love welled up in him. He knew he was commanded to give her this terrible name, but in his human heart, he wanted to defy it. He wanted to shower her with the mercy her name denied, and in that internal war, he understood God even more. He understood the agony of a father who must discipline, who must pull back, who must let the consequences fall, even when his heart yearns to gather his children close. I will be her father, Hosea vowed to the empty room, to the silent Gomer, and to the listening heavens. Though she is not of my blood, she will eat at my table. I will cover her shame. Gomer turned her face to the wall. The shame was too much to look at. She had brought a child into the world to be a billboard of rejection. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, guilt. But it was quickly swallowed by a darker, more familiar feeling, despair. If God had no mercy, then what chance did a woman like her have? The baby cried, a lonely sound in the night. Hosea rocked her, whispering the name that would haunt her life. Lo-Ruhamah, Lo-Ruhamah. It was a lullaby of judgment, sung by a father who refused to leave, even when the darkness had fully entered his home. The rift was now absolute. The family was broken, and the third child, the final blow, was yet to come. The table was set for the evening meal, but it felt less like a family gathering and more like a truce between warring nations. The air in the room was thick, not with the warmth of the hearth, but with a silence so dense it made the simple act of chewing sound loud and intrusive. Jezreel, now a boy with watchful, frightened eyes, sat quietly, picking at his lentils. Beside him sat Lo-Ruhamah, a toddler who had learned early that crying rarely brought comfort. She ate with a hunger that seemed too large for her small frame. At the head of the table sat Hosea. He looked older than his years, lines of sorrow etched deeply around his mouth. And then there was Gomer. She did not sit. She stood near the door, adjusting a mantle of crimson wool that was far too fine for a prophet's wife. Her movements were sharp, hurried. She was not preparing to serve the meal. She was preparing to leave it. "Sit, Gomer," Hosea said, his voice low. "The children are eating. Break bread with us." Gomer laughed, a harsh sound that made Jezreel flinch. She turned to face him, fastening a silver clasp at her shoulder. "Bread? You call this bread, Hosea? It is dry. It tastes of duty and dust." "It is the bread of honest labor," Hosea replied, his eyes fixed on the crimson mantle. "Where did you get that wool, Gomer? I did not buy it for you. The sheep in our pasture are white, not dyed in the colors of Tyre." Gomer stroked the fabric possessively. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of defiance and pity. "You think you are the only one who can provide for me? You think your God is the only source of rain and grain? You are wrong, my lovers. They know how to treat a woman. They give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink." Hosea stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The theological weight of her words crushed him. It was exactly what the nation was saying to the idols. They believed the rain came from Baal, the grain from the local deities. They took the gifts of the Almighty and thanked the statues of stone. "They give you nothing but snares," Hosea said, his voice rising. "Do you not see? I am the one who hedges your way. I am the one who protects you from the darkness you crave. Those men do not love you. They consume you. They desire me," Gomer shouted back. "And that is more than I feel in this house. Here, I am a sermon. Here, I am a mistake you are trying to fix. Out there, I am Gomer. Out there, you are prey," Hosea warned, stepping closer. "Do not go tonight. I beg you, look at your daughter. Look at Lo-Ruhamah. She needs a mother, not a ghost who vanishes when the sun sets." Gomer glanced at the little girl. For a second, her expression wavered, but then she touched the silver clasp again, the payment, the bribe, the tangible proof of her worth in the eyes of others. The pull of the night was too strong. The addiction to validation, to the chaotic freedom of the streets, overrode the quiet plea of the home. "She has you," Gomer said coldly. "You are father and mother both, aren't you? You are so perfect, Hosea. You don't need me." She turned and opened the door. The night air rushed in, chilling the room instantly. "If you walk out that door," Hosea called after her, his voice breaking, "you are walking into a wilderness I cannot protect you from." Gomer paused on the threshold. She did not look back. "I prefer the wilderness to this cage," she said. The door slammed shut. Hosea stood motionless. The silence returned, heavier than before. Lo-Ruhamah began to whimper. Hosea exhaled a breath that shook his entire frame. He walked back to the table, sat down, and pulled the chair of his daughter close to his own. He dipped a piece of bread into the broth and held it to her lips. "Eat," he whispered to the children of whoredom. "Your father is here." But in his heart, he heard the echo of Gomer's words, "My lovers give me my bread." It was the ultimate betrayal. She did not just reject his love. She denied his providence. She attributed the very sustenance of her life to the thieves who were stealing her soul. And Hosea knew, with a terrifying clarity, that God felt this same knife twisting in his heart every single day. Time moved with the sluggish cruelty of a drought. The seasons changed, but the climate in Hosea's soul remained a perpetual winter. Gomer returned, as she always did, disheveled and moody, only to leave again when the restlessness took her. But this time, the consequences were undeniable. She was with child again. There was no pretense this time. No attempt to claim the child was Hosea's. The timeline was impossible. She had been gone for weeks during the harvest festivals, staying in the tents of the pagan priests. When she returned, her belly was already swelling with the fruit of her rebellion. The pregnancy was a public spectacle. The townspeople stopped whispering and started pointing. Hosea walked the streets like a man made of glass, fragile and exposed. He could feel their scorn. "Why does he keep her?" they asked. "Is he a coward? Does he have no honor?" Hosea asked himself the same questions in the dead of night, but every time he resolved to write the bill of divorce, the voice held him back. "Not yet," it whispered. "The picture is not complete." When the labor pains began, Gomer did not go to the birthing stool with hope. She went with resignation. She was tired. Her body was worn down by the life she led, and this child felt less like a new life and more like a heavy stone she had been forced to carry. The birth was quick, almost violent in its speed. It was a boy. The room was quiet. There were no prayers of thanksgiving. Gomer lay back, exhausted, turning her head away from the infant wailing in the midwife's hands. She felt no connection to him. He was a stranger, just like his father. Hosea stepped forward. He looked at the boy. The child was healthy, crying with lusty vigor, demanding to be heard. But as Hosea looked at him, he felt a strange void. With Jezreel, there had been warning. With Lo-Ruhamah, there had been pity. With this child, there was only distance. The voice of the Lord filled the room, colder and sharper than Hosea had ever heard it. "Call his name Lo-Ammi," the Lord commanded. Hosea froze. The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "Lo-Ammi, not my people. For you are not my people," the Lord continued, speaking through Hosea to the entire nation of Israel, "and I am not your God." The sentence was a death knell. In the ancient Hebrew tongue, the phrase was even more devastating. It echoed the sacred name revealed to Moses at the burning bush, "I am." God was saying, "You are not my people, and to you, I am not, I am." It was the reversal of the covenant. It was the undoing of Exodus. Hosea picked up the child. "Lo-Ammi," he said aloud. The name sucked the air out of the room. The midwife gasped. To tell a child he did not belong was the ultimate curse. It was to strip him of identity, of heritage, of protection. Hosea looked at Gomer. She was watching him, her eyes dark and unreadable. "He is not mine," Hosea said, his voice void of emotion, stating a biological fact that carried a theological thunderbolt. "And you have made yourself a stranger to me." Gomer sat up slowly. The reality of the name pierced even her hardened shell. "Lo-Ammi," she whispered, "you are disowning him?" "I am naming the reality you chose," Hosea replied. "You chose to belong to others. You chose to give yourself to the world. This child is the fruit of that choice. He belongs to no one, just as Israel now belongs to no one." The baby cried, a sound of utter abandonment. Hosea wrapped him in the cloth, doing the duty of a father while carrying the message of a judge. "We are broken, Gomer," Hosea said, looking at his wife across the chasm of their ruined marriage. "The covenant is snapped. There is nothing holding this house together but my refusal to let it collapse completely." Gomer looked at the baby, then at Hosea. For the first time, she felt the true terror of her freedom. To be Lo-Ammi was to be alone in the universe. If Hosea was not her husband, and God was not their God, then who was left to catch them when they fell? "I cannot stay here," Gomer said suddenly, a panic rising in her chest. The weight of the judgment was too heavy. The eyes of the righteous prophet, filled with such terrible sorrow, were like mirrors she could not bear to look into. "I know," Hosea said. He did not move to stop her. He knew the prophecy required this too, the total abandonment. "I will go," she said, her voice trembling. "I will go back to my lovers. They do not name my children with curses." "They do not name your children at all," Hosea answered softly. "They do not care enough to name them." But Gomer was already rising, ignoring her pain, driven by a desperate need to escape the truth. She looked at Lo-Ammi one last time, the son of no one, and turned her face toward the door. The house of Hosea had finally fallen. The separation was complete. God and Israel, Hosea and Gomer, the bond was severed, and the long night of the soul had officially begun. The decision to leave was not made with a shout, but with a suffocating quietness. Gomer moved through the darkened house like a thief, though she was stealing nothing but herself. The moon was hidden, leaving the room in a shade of gray that made everything look dead. The cold hearth, the water jar standing in the corner, the sleeping forms of the children on the mats. She had waited until the breathing of the household deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Or at least, she hoped they were asleep. Gomer gathered her belongings. She did not take the sensible wool cloaks Hosea had bought for the winter. Instead, she stuffed a sack with the trinkets of her former life, the silver ankle chains, the earrings of hammered gold, the sheer veils that offered no warmth but promised attention. These were the currency of the world she was returning to. She moved with a frantic energy, her hands shaking as she tied the leather straps of her sandals. She paused at the foot of the sleeping mats. Jezreel lay curled on his side, his thumb near his mouth. Even in sleep, his brow was furrowed, as if the weight of his prophetic name pressed down on his dreams. Beside him lay Lo-Ruhamah, the girl who had never known a smile that reached her mother's eyes, and in the cradle, Lo-Ammi, the infant who had been disowned by a name before he could speak a word. Gomer felt a sharp, twisting pain in her gut. It was not love, she told herself. It was guilt, and guilt was a useless emotion. It was a chain that kept women like her bound to men like Hosea, men who were too good, too holy, too suffocating. If she stayed, she would destroy them with her bitterness. Leaving was a mercy, she reasoned. They would be better off without a mother who looked at the horizon more than she looked at their faces. She stepped toward the door. The wood was old and heavy. She placed her hand on the latch, holding her breath. "You do not have to go." The voice came from the shadows near the window. Gomer froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She did not turn around. She knew the voice. It was calm, devoid of the anger she expected, and that made it unbearable. "I cannot breathe here, Hosea," she whispered to the door. "There is air here," Hosea replied, his voice sounding tired, infinite in its sadness. "There is bread, there is covenant." "Covenant," she spat the word out softly. "That is your word, not mine. I never knew what it meant. I just wanted to be safe. But safety is a cage." "Safety is not a cage, Gomer. It is a foundation. But you have never known the difference between a home and a prison because you have never been free in your heart." Gomer gripped the latch tighter. "Do not preach to me. Not now. I am leaving. I am going to find the men who know who I am. They do not call me a symbol. They do not look at me and see a failing nation. They see Gomer. They see a mirror for their own lust," Hosea said. He stepped out of the shadows, but he did not move to stop her. He did not block her path. "If you go, you walk into a darkness you have forgotten. You think you remember the wine and the music, but you have forgotten the cold of the morning and the bruises of the night." "I will take my chances," she said, her voice hardening. "I belong to the wind, Hosea. You knew that when you married me." "I knew," he admitted, "and I married you anyway." The silence stretched between them, a vast, unbridgeable canyon. Gomer waited for him to scream, to forbid her, to use his strength to force her back to the mat. That would have been easier. Then she could have hated him. She could have left as a victim. But he just stood there, respecting her terrible choice, loving her enough to let her destroy herself if that was what she insisted upon. "Goodbye, prophet," she whispered. She lifted the latch. The door groaned, a sound that seemed to tear the night apart. She slipped through the opening and into the cool, biting air of the street. She did not look back. If she had, she might have seen the man of God sink to his knees, not in prayer, but in a grief so profound it had no words. She ran. She ran until the cobblestones turned to dust, until the orderly houses of the righteous district gave way to the chaotic, torch-lit alleys of the lower city. Back in the house, the infant Lo-Ammi began to cry. It was a hungry, lonely sound. Hosea remained on his knees for a long moment, listening to the footsteps of his wife fade into the distance. Then, slowly, heavily, he stood up. He walked to the cradle and lifted the son, who was not his. He held the child against his chest, rocking him in the darkness, whispering assurances that he knew were only half true. The mother was gone. The father remained, and the long watch of the single parent had begun. The sun rose on a house that felt hollowed out. The space where Gomer used to be even her sullen, silent presence was now a gaping void that sucked the energy out of the room. Hosea moved through the morning with mechanical efficiency. He lit the fire. He ground the grain. He changed the soiled cloths of the infant. Jezreel was the first to ask. The boy sat at the small wooden table, staring at the empty mat where his mother usually slept. "Where is she?" he asked. His voice was small, but his eyes were accusing. He was old enough to know the tension that had vibrated through the walls for years. He was old enough to know what the other children whispered in the marketplace. Hosea paused, holding a bowl of porridge. He looked at his son. He could not lie. A prophet could not speak falsehood, even to protect a child's heart. "She has gone away," Hosea said. "Is she coming back?" Jezreel asked. "I do not know," Hosea answered. "She has chosen a different path for now." "Is it because of us?" Jezreel's voice trembled. "Is it because my name is a bad thing?" The question struck Hosea like a physical blow. He set the bowl down and knelt before his son, gripping the boy's thin shoulders. "No," Hosea said fiercely. "It is not because of you. It is not because of your sister or your brother. It is because her heart is sick, Jezreel. She has forgotten how to be home. Do not ever think this is your burden to carry." But Hosea knew the boy would carry it. They all would. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Hosea's life became a grueling test of endurance. He was a spectacle in the city. When he went to the market to buy milk or wool, carrying Lo-Ammi in a sling across his chest and holding Lo-Ruhamah by the hand, the conversation stopped. The people stared. They saw the great prophet of Jehovah reduced to a nursemaid. They saw his tunic stained with the spit-up of an infant. They saw the dark circles under his eyes. "Look at him," the whispers followed him. "He speaks of God's power, yet he cannot rule his own wife. He speaks of judgment, yet he raises the children of another man." One afternoon, Hosea stood at the city gate to deliver a word from the Lord. He felt the Spirit compelling him, burning in his bones. He handed the baby to Jezreel, who sat in the dust nearby, and stood to speak. "Hear the word of the Lord, O children of Israel." Hosea's voice rang out, hoarse but powerful. "There is no faithfulness or steadfast love, and no knowledge of God in the land. There is swearing, lying, murder, stealing, and committing adultery. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed." A man in the crowd, a priest of the high places with wine-stained lips, laughed aloud. "Adultery?" the priest mocked. "You speak to us of adultery, Hosea? Go home and check your own bed. Go find your wife in the vineyards of the foreigners before you tell us how to worship." The crowd erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, biting sound. Hosea stood there, the words of God dying in his throat. He looked at the faces of his people, arrogant, blind, lost. He felt a flash of pure rage. He wanted to call down fire. He wanted to scream that his pain was their mirror, that his unfaithful wife was exactly what they looked like to heaven. But then he looked down at Jezreel. The boy was trying to rock the crying baby, his face red with shame. Hosea stepped down from the stone. He did not finish the sermon. He walked over to his children, scooped up the baby, took Jezreel's hand, and walked away through the jeering crowd. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Hosea went to the roof of his house. The stars were bright, indifferent to the suffering below. Hosea fell on his face. "How long?" he cried out to the silence. "How long must I be a mockery? You told me to marry her. I obeyed. You told me to name these children with curses. I obeyed. And now she is gone, and I am left with the wreckage. Release me, Lord. Let me write the bill of divorce. Let me wash my hands of this shame." He waited for the release. He waited for God to say, "It is enough. You have suffered enough." But the answer that came was not release. It was a question, whispered in the wind, that swept over the sleeping city. "Do you hate her?" Hosea wept. He dug his fingers into the clay of the roof. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to hate Gomer for the humiliation, for the abandonment, for the way Lo-Ruhamah cried for a mother who wasn't there. "I am angry," Hosea admitted to the dark. "I am wounded." "But do you stop loving her?" the voice persisted. Hosea closed his eyes. Images of Gomer flashed in his mind. Not the hardened woman who left, but the woman he had seen in brief moments of vulnerability. He saw the brokenness beneath the rebellion, and beneath his anger, he found a terrifying truth. He still wanted her to come home. He still kept the door unlatched. "No," Hosea whispered, defeated by grace. "I do not stop." "Then you are beginning to understand," the Lord said. "For I too am angry. I too am wounded. My bride has left me for wood and stone. She credits the rain to Baal. She forgets who gave her the grain and the wine. But I do not stop. Go, Hosea. Be the father to the fatherless. Stand in the gap, for the story is not over. Hosea stood up. He wiped his face. He went back downstairs into the house that smelled of loneliness. He checked on the children. Lo-Ammi, not my people, was sleeping soundly, fed by the hand of the man who had every right to reject him. Hosea pulled the blanket up to the boy's chin. He would stay. He would endure the mockery. He would raise these children in the fear of the Lord, even if their mother was dancing in the house of idols. He would be the keeper of the home, the watchman on the wall, waiting for the day when the ruin would be rebuilt. The wilderness was vast, and he was walking it alone, but he walked with the knowledge that he was the only shadow of God these children and this nation had left. The first few months of Gomer's departure felt like a fever dream of vivid colors and loud noises. She had run from the silence of the prophet's house into the roar of the city, desperate to drown out the voice of judgment that seemed to echo in the very walls of her former home. She found her way to the high districts, to the houses of men who worshipped success as fervently as Hosea worshipped Yahweh. For a season, it seemed she had made the right choice. She was beautiful, exotic in her notoriety, the runaway wife of the doomsaying prophet. Men found a thrill in possessing what the holy man could not keep. She wore scarlet robes again. She drank wine from cups imported from Assyria. She laughed at feasts where the music never stopped and the lamps burned until dawn. You see, she whispered to herself one evening, looking into a polished bronze mirror in the chamber of a wealthy grain merchant. You are not dead. You are not a symbol. You are alive. But the life she claimed was fragile. The merchant, a man named Balak, was generous with his gold but stingy with his heart. He did not ask about her children. When she mentioned Jezreel once, in a moment of drunken melancholy, Balak had struck her not with his fist, but with his words. "Do not bring your baggage into my bed," he had sneered. "I pay for your smile, Gomer, not your sorrows. If you want to weep, go back to your prophet." The words cut deeper than she expected. She realized then that her freedom came with a condition. She had to be perpetually happy, perpetually alluring. She could not have a bad day. She could not age. She could not grieve. As the seasons turned, the novelty of her presence began to fade. Younger women arrived in the city, women with no children, no scandalous history, and smoother skin. The invitations to the high feasts became fewer. Balak began to look past her, his eyes wandering to fresh arrivals. One night, Gomer reached for the wine jar, her hand trembling. The silence she had run from was beginning to find her again, even here in the noise. She realized with a sinking dread that she was not a guest in this world. She was a rental, and the lease was running out. The descent was not sudden. It was a slow, grinding slide into the mud. When Balak grew tired of her, he did not send her away with a pension. He simply stopped opening his door. Gomer moved down the hill, from the district of the merchants to the district of the soldiers, and then to the district of the laborers. With each step down, the wine became more sour, the men became rougher, and the coin she received became lighter. She sold the earrings first, then the silver ankle chains, then the fine scarlet cloak. A year after leaving Hosea, Gomer found herself in a debt she could not pay. She had borrowed money to maintain the illusion of her lifestyle, believing another wealthy patron would save her. None came. The creditor was a man with a face like flint. He did not care about her past or her beauty, which was now marred by hunger and exhaustion. He cared only for his ledger. "You cannot pay," the creditor said, standing in the doorway of the hovel she rented. "I need more time," Gomer pleaded. Her hands were rough now, her fingernails broken. "I can work. I can weave." "You are too old to weave fast enough to pay the interest," the man said coldly, "and you are no longer young enough to earn your way on your back in the high courts." He snapped his fingers. Two large men stepped forward. "You belong to me now," the creditor declared. "You will work off your debt in the barley fields and the mills. You are no longer a free woman. You are property." The horror of it paralyzed her. Slavery. It was the ultimate nightmare of every Israelite, the very thing their God had rescued them from in Egypt. And now, she had walked willingly back into it. They dragged her away. She did not scream. She had no voice left. They took her to a holding pen, a place where debtors and slaves were kept before being assigned to their labor. It was a place of stench and misery. Gomer sat in the dirt, her knees pulled to her chest. She was wearing rags. Her hair was matted. She looked at her hands and remembered the touch of Hosea, gentle, respectful, firm. She remembered the bread on his table. She remembered the safety she had called a cage. "I chased lovers," she whispered to the damp walls, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "I thought they gave me my bread and my water, but they only gave me a price tag." She was truly Lo-Ruhamah now, no mercy. She was truly Lo-Ammi, not a person. She was just a thing to be sold. And in the deepest pit of her despair, she finally knew who had truly loved her. But she also knew it was too late. The prophet would never come to a place like this. Hosea sat on the roof of his house. The city below was sleeping, but he was awake. He was always awake. The children were growing. Jezreel was tall and solemn, carrying a wisdom beyond his years. Lo-Ruhamah was quiet, always watching the door. Lo-Ammi was a toddler who clung to Hosea's leg as if afraid the ground would open up and swallow him. Hosea had done his duty. He had provided. He had taught. He had endured the mockery of the elders who whispered that a man who could not keep a wife was unfit to speak for God. He had borne the shame of a single father in a society that blamed him for her departure. He thought the lesson was over. He thought the prophecy was complete. Israel leaves, God remains alone. But the night wind shifted, and the voice returned. It was not the thunderous command of the first time. It was a whisper, intimate and agonizing, cutting straight to the scar tissue on his heart. "Go again," the Lord said. Hosea stiffened. "Go again? Love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress." The voice continued. "Even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisins." Hosea stood up, pacing the small roof. "Love her?" he asked the stars. "Lord, she has left me. She has shamed me. She is likely dead or enslaved. I do not even know where she is." "Go again," the command repeated. "Redeem her." It was an impossible request. The law of Moses allowed a man to divorce an unfaithful wife. It certainly did not require him to buy her back after she had squandered everything. To do so was to trample on his own pride, his own justice. But Hosea knew the heart of the one speaking. He realized, with a jolt that shook his soul, that this was not about fair contracts. This was about a covenant that refused to die. God was willing to pay a price for a people who had sold themselves for nothing. "I will go," Hosea whispered. The next morning, he counted his wealth. It was not much. The famine in the land had touched everyone, and he had been caring for 3 children alone. He opened the small clay jar where he kept his savings. Silver coins spilled out. He counted them. 1, 2, 3. He stopped at 15. 15 shekels of silver. It was the price of a common slave, perhaps less. It was half the price of a healthy female servant. It is not enough, he realized. He went to the storage room. He measured the barley. He had a homer and a lethek of barley, about enough to feed a family for a short season. It was peasant food, animal feed. "Silver and barley," Hosea muttered, packing the grain into sacks. "I will buy my wife with the scraps of my poverty." It was humiliating. He would not march in with gold like a king. He would walk in with the desperation of a man scraping the bottom of the barrel, but he would walk. He loaded the donkey. He kissed the sleeping foreheads of Jezreel, Lo-Ruhamah, and Lo-Ammi. "I am going to get your mother," he told the eldest boy, who had woken up. Jezreel looked at the sacks of barley. "Will she come?" "She has no choice," Hosea said, his eyes burning with a fierce, holy light. "But this time, neither do I. Love compels me." The slave market was a scar on the face of the city. It was located in the lower valley, where the air was thick with dust and the smell of fear. Hosea led his donkey through the crowds. He felt the eyes of men upon him, some recognizing him as the prophet, others seeing only a potential buyer. He did not care. He was on a mission that transcended reputation. He found the auction block where the debtors were being sold. The auctioneer, a man with a loud voice and a cane, was parading the merchandise. And then Hosea saw her. She was standing near the back, chained to a wooden post. She was thin, her collarbones protruding sharply against her rags. Her hair was graying and matted. Her head was bowed low, her eyes fixed on the dirt. She looked broken. She looked like a discarded vessel. The auctioneer grabbed her arm and pulled her forward. "Here is one for the fields," he shouted. "She is not young, but she has strong hands." Who will open the bidding? The crowd was silent. No one wanted a worn-out woman. 5 shekels. A voice called out, a man looking for cheap labor for his mill. I hear 5, the auctioneer yelled. Do I hear 10? 10 shekels, another voice said. A brothel keeper, looking for someone to clean the floors. Gomer did not look up. She wished the ground would open and swallow her. She was worth 10 shekels, less than a sheep. 15 shekels. The voice cut through the noise like a trumpet blast. It was familiar. It was a sound from another life. Gomer's head snapped up. She saw him, standing at the edge of the crowd, covered in the dust of the road, holding the reins of a donkey laden with sacks. Hosea. He was looking at her, not with the disgust she deserved, not with the pity she hated, but with a burning intensity that made her tremble. 15 shekels? The auctioneer laughed. The prophet bids. But do you have the silver, holy man? Hosea stepped forward. He poured the coins into the auctioneer's hand. 15 shekels of silver, he announced loudly, and a homer and a lethek of barley. The crowd murmured. It was a strange price. It was a mix of currency and commodity, the payment of a poor man giving everything he had. The barley is good, the auctioneer said, inspecting the sacks. The bid is accepted. She is yours. He unlocked the chain from the post. He shoved Gomer forward. She stumbled, falling to her knees in the dirt before Hosea. She could not look at him. She stared at his sandals. She waited for the anger. She waited for him to tell her how much she had cost him, how low she had brought him. Instead, she felt his hands on her shoulders. Strong, warm, and he pulled her up. Hosea, she choked out, her voice cracked and dry. Why? I am trash. I am used up. You are my wife, Hosea said, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. I have bought you. You are not a slave. You are redeemed. He took his own cloak, the mantle of a prophet, and wrapped it around her shivering, filthy shoulders. He covered her shame with his own honor. Let us go home, he said. He helped her onto the donkey. He did not ride. He walked beside her, leading the beast, walking out of the valley of slavery, past the stunned silence of the crowd. He had paid the price. He had emptied his jar and his granary. But as he looked at the broken woman on the donkey, he knew he had secured the greatest sermon of his life. The journey home was slow. They did not speak for many miles. The rhythm of the donkey's hooves on the stone was the only sound in the vast silence of the wilderness. Gomer sat hunched under the cloak. Her mind was reeling. She tried to understand the economics of what had just happened. She was worthless, yet he had paid a price. She was unfaithful, yet he had come for her. It broke every rule of the world she had lived in. When they finally stopped to rest near a terebinth tree, Hosea offered her water from his skin. She took it, her hands shaking. I cannot be your wife again, she whispered, the shame finally finding words. I have been with many. I am unclean, Hosea, the law says. The law exposes the wound, Hosea interrupted gently. But love heals it. He sat beside her on the rock. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, she did not see a judge. She saw a husband. Listen to me, Gomer, he said, his voice solemn, reciting the terms of the new covenant he was making with her. You shall dwell with me for many days. You shall not play the whore, and you shall not belong to another man. And so will I also be to you. It was a restriction, yes. She would have to stay. She would have to undergo a period of purification, of waiting, of abstinence, even from him until her heart and body were healed. But in that restriction, she heard the greatest promise of her life. And so will I also be to you. He was pledging his faithfulness to her again. He was waiting for her. You want me? She asked, tears spilling over, washing the dust from her cheeks. After everything? I want you, Hosea said, because God wants Israel, and through us, he is shouting to them. They continued the journey. As they approached the city, they passed the valley of Acre, a place known for trouble and judgment. But the sun was setting, casting a golden light over the rocky terrain. Look, Hosea pointed. The valley of Acre shall be a door of hope. They arrived at the house. The door was unlatched. Jezreel was waiting. When he saw the donkey and the woman wrapped in his father's cloak, he ran forward. He stopped a few paces away, uncertain. Gomer slid off the donkey. She fell to her knees in the dust of her own courtyard. She opened her arms, not assuming they would come, but hoping. "Mother," Jezreel whispered. He ran to her. Then Lo-Ruhamah. Then the toddler Lo-Ammi, who barely knew her but followed the others. Hosea stood back and watched. He saw the tears mixing with the dirt. He saw the reunion of the broken. And then the Spirit of the Lord descended upon him one last time, rewriting the names of the tragedy. "Call them by new names," the Spirit whispered to Hosea's heart. Hosea stepped forward, placing his hand on Jezreel's head. "God sows," he said, "not for judgment, but for harvest. He will plant us in this land again." He looked at the girl, Lo-Ruhamah. "Ruhamah," he declared. "Mercy. She has obtained mercy." He looked at the boy, Lo-Ammi. "Ammi," he said, his voice breaking with joy. "My people, you are my people, and I am your God." Gomer looked up at her husband. The hardness in her face was gone, replaced by a soft, broken gratitude. She had been bought back. She was home. The family entered the house, closing the door against the night. The scandal was over. The redemption had begun. And in the heavens, the Almighty looked down at the little house in Israel, seeing the perfect picture of the love he bore for a world that would always run away, and the cross that would one day pay the price to bring them back. The story of Hosea was finished, but the story of grace had just begun.